Well, congratulations, everyone. You have arrived. You have officially made it to 2025. And you have lived through all 365 days of 2024. You have experienced 52 Sundays as a chance to come together and worship and connect and reflect and reset. You, if you work full time, have clocked in about 260 days, give or take some vacation or sick leaves or holidays. If you have been journeying through 2024, you have eaten over 1,000 meals, plus or minus a couple, and maybe some of those you savored and delighted in, maybe some of those you have completely forgotten about and moved quickly through. You've had some good moments, hopefully, over this past year. Maybe 100 moments of laughter with friends, maybe 50 hugs from loved ones. And you've probably had some hard moments, too. Maybe 15 sleepless nights, maybe some moments of heartbreak that you wish would have never happened, moments that you wish you could just forget. And so all of these numbers of 2024 tell a story, the story of our lives. And when we come to begin a new year, it's kind of like we're turning the page on the chapter of our lives. I don't know about you, but I love to read, and I still love to read old-fashioned books, right? Like Kindles and iPads are great, but I like to still hold an actual book to have the satisfaction of turning an actual page. And when I read, I try to read a little bit every night before I go to sleep. I like, if possible, to pause in between chapters, to finish one chapter and to think about what that chapter said, and to look forward with anticipation to the next chapter. And I really think that's what we get to do when a new year happens. That we are invited into an intentional pause to reflect back on what was the chapter of 2024 in our lives? What did that teach us? What lessons were learned? What did we experience in that year? And to pause and look forward with anticipation to 2025. To think about how God showed up in our lives in 2024 and to be open to dream and to vision with God, to live with intention into 2025. And when I think about a new year, this intentional pause between the chapters of our lives, I love thinking about Psalm 90. And so here are some selected verses from Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or a watch in the night. The days of our lives are 70 years, or perhaps 80 if we're strong. Even then, their span is only toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. This psalm is often attributed to Moses, a prayer that perhaps he wrote while he was wandering around in the wilderness. And we see in this psalm that from generation to generation, from everlasting to everlasting, God is a God. That before time even began, the Lord is God. And God is the God of 2024 and the God of 2025. That God is with us from generation to generation, from everlasting to everlasting. But yet, I love verse 12 in this psalm because it teaches us to number our days so that we can live as wise people. And I don't think if Moses, in fact, did pray this prayer, I don't think he's saying that we have to be obsessive about counting our days or our schedule or all the hours of our lives. But instead, I think the premise here is numbering our days so we can have wisdom. Or we could say it a different way, that those who count their days are more likely to make their days count. That if we are willing to live with intentionality, to be intentional about the time we have, we're more likely to make our days count. Because the days that we have or the years of our life are not meant to be wasted away into oblivion. We're not to be futile with them. Instead, we are to fill our lives with faith. That because God is eternal and God is faithful, God is eternally, faithfully turning toward us, filling our lives with meaning and purpose and goodness. That each day of our life is an opportunity to wake up and to partner with God, not to waste our days, but to be intentional about them, to live on mission with God, to be people of faith and hope and love. Because our days are not just numbers, they are opportunities, moments for God to show up or transformation to happen in our lives or those around us, for wisdom to be gained. That we aren't just to waste away our days scrolling on social media or watching one television show after another, but to be intentional about the time God has given us so that we can be faithful stewards of that time, living on mission with God, partnering with God's will for us in this new year. And so today I'm inviting us into an intentional pause to reflect on what happened in our lives in 2024 and to dream and vision with God about what God is calling us into 2025. And I acknowledge right off the bat that this idea of pausing in between years is countercultural. We live in a world that's not obsessed with pausing, but instead is obsessed with productivity, that our value seems to be in what we do or produce or how we perform, that we're always go, 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 that we wear our busyness almost as like a badge of honor. But today I'm saying to pause and to say no to the productivity, just to take a moment to reflect on 2024 and to dream with intention into 2025. That God can lead us faithfully into this new year. And I think a really important question for us is, are we moving fast or are we moving faithfully? How is God calling us to live into 2025? And when we think about this intentional pause, we realize that pausing to self-reflect on the year that we've just lived through and dreaming for the year to come is not self-indulgence. In fact, it's a spiritual practice or a spiritual discipline modeled by Jesus himself. In fact, in Mark 1, we see Jesus getting up very early, going off to a solitary place and praying, taking time in prayer and reflection. And if Jesus, the eternal Son of God, needed to take time alone to pray, how much more so do you and I need to do the same? Because when I think about our spiritual lives, or I think about taking a moment to pause and to self-reflect on 2024 and dream about 2025, this image comes to mind for me. That whenever you see a beautiful mountain reflected in the water, you realize that that water has to be still in order to see the image reflected in it. If that water was bubbling or stirring or moving too fast, you couldn't see the reflection so clearly. And I think the same is true in our spiritual lives, that you and I, we are the water, that we need moments of still, of calm, so that we can reflect God, who is the mountain in this picture. That if our purpose in life is to reflect the image of God in us, then we need to make sure we're taking moments of pause to be still and calm so that God can be reflected more fully in our lives. So today we're going to take a pause, not to check out, but to check in, to reflect back on 2024 and to dream ahead in 2025. So when I love this verse out of Psalm 77 that says, once again, I'll go over what God has done. I'll lay out on the table the ancient wonders. I'll ponder all the things you've accomplished and give a long, loving look at your acts. That this encourages us to look back, to realize in 2024 it was filled with all sorts of things, with joy and with sorrow, with triumph and with trial. But we give thanks and we look for God's faithfulness. We look for how God showed up on those mountaintop experiences and in the valleys that we experienced in 2024. We look for God's faithfulness even in our moments of doubt or disappointment. It makes me think about that passage in Romans 8, that in all things God works for the good of those who've been called according to God's purpose. This passage doesn't mean that everything is going to be good, but it means that God is willing to work through and redeem everything, even the most painful moments of our lives. Or think about the Israelites. When they crossed over the Jordan River, God called them to set up memorial stones, to build an Ebenezer, to remember God's faithfulness of how God had delivered them. So when we take an intentional pause to reflect back on God's faithfulness in this past year, we too are raising up memorial stones. If you are a journaling person, this is a great opportunity to journal and to think about God's faithfulness and to look for that, to be unaware of it for how God's going to show up in 2025. So as you look back on 2024, I want you to think about what were some of your greatest delights. Maybe you could pull out your phone and scroll through your photos or your social media posts and be like, what were some of the highlights for you of 2024? Maybe there was new family members that you welcomed, maybe a new relationship you experienced, or a fun vacation, or something brand new that you never got to do before. What were some of your greatest delights in 2024? And how can you recognize and see God's goodness and God's faithfulness and provision for you in those moments? Because friends, sometimes when we look back where we thought we saw scarcity, there was actually evidence of God's abundance. It's like that famous story where Jesus feeds over 5,000 people with just a little bit of bread and fish. The disciples only saw scarcity. They only saw, Jesus, how are we going to feed all these people? But Jesus saw abundance. And I think sometimes when we look back in our lives where we thought there was scarcity, there was actually abundance of God providing for us. And then I want you to think about what were maybe some of your greatest disappointments of 2024. To be honest, that 2024 was not perfect. There were bumps in the road. Maybe there's some real pain for you. And to be honest about that, if we're willing to name our pain, we can find healing. That we can't heal what we don't feel. So to be willing to look back on 2024 and think about the pain you experienced. Maybe a relationship that was lost or broken. Maybe a loved one or loved ones that you lost. Maybe a change in your job, maybe a move. What were some of the disappointments or pain for you in 2024? And that as you think about that, know that God is close to the brokenhearted, that God promises to save those who feel crushed in spirit, that you are in good company in your disappointments, as so many of the Psalms are laments, like Psalm 13, where the psalmist cries out to God, God, how long will you forget me? That we can think and wrestle through the pain that we've experienced in 2024. But what I love about the laments is they don't end in disappointment and sorrow, but they end in trust and reassurance. Or even when we think about Jesus coming to the tomb of Lazarus, his friend, and Jesus weeping over the loss of his friend, over the disappointment that Jesus experienced, that grief could give way to healing. That if we're willing to name our pain, we might be able to find hope and healing on the other side of it, to find healing from the struggles that we faced in 2024. Maybe we'll find healing for that in 2025. So I want you to reflect back and think about what were your greatest delights and what were your greatest disappointments. And after you've taken some time to begin to think about that, then you can look forward into 2025. I love this passage out of Isaiah 43 that God is doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? That it's not like we're just bulldozing our way into 2025 doing whatever we want, but God is already in 2025, already working on our behalf, already doing a new thing. The question is, do we realize it? Are we partnering with God's mission and work in the world? And so we naturally will make plans or goals or maybe New Year's resolutions for the new year, but we need to hold all those plans loosely, because ultimately God is in control of our lives, that we just want to be in a posture of surrender to partner with God. I love thinking about Mary when I think about this posture of surrender, because Mary had no idea the whole plans that God had for her. But this angel comes to her telling her that she's going to become the mom of the very Son of God, and Mary's position is one of surrender. That she says, may it be as you've said, for I am a servant of the Lord. May that be our posture when we think about our plans and what God is calling and inviting us into 2025. So as you think about this new year, I encourage you to dream with God, to think about what are your hopes and dreams for this new year, and to hold all of that loosely into a posture of surrender with God. And maybe as you think about that, you could get to a place of prayer of naming 4 powerful words. Your will be done. For God's will to be done in your life in 2025. And to think about who will you become? Because all of us will become something in 2025, either intentionally or unintentionally. We'll either become more loving or less loving. We'll either become more awake and alive or less alive. The choice is up to us, and how do we place ourselves to live intention, to make our days count, so that we can live into the mission and the vision God has for us for this new year. So on your way in today, you all should have received a slip of paper, and I invite you to pull that out. And this is a guide for you to begin to use today and to take home with you, to hopefully take some time of pausing and stillness to reflect on 2024 and to dream about 2025. So in just a few moments, we're going to celebrate communion together. And while we celebrate communion, I give you full permission to begin to use this guide, to take some moments of reflection, to begin to journal your thoughts here, and to take this home with you to continue this work. But to write down 3 moments of joy and delight from 2024 and how those moments revealed God's goodness. What did you learn about God? What did you learn in your life in 2024? And then to write down 3 disappointments and how can you invite God into those spaces for healing? What maybe lessons did you learn even from your disappointments that you couldn't have learned any other way in 2024? And then to look forward, to dream about 2025, to write down your hopes and dreams, to hold them with a posture of surrender, to get to a place of prayer saying, God, your will be done, not my will, but your will be done. And to reflect on who is God calling you to become in 2025. What habits or disciplines will help you reflect Christ's character? Maybe in 2025, you know, hey, I really want to commit to spending time in prayer, maybe just 5 minutes a day. Or I want to start a Bible reading plan on the YouVersion Bible app. Or I want to join a small group to be in community with other Christians. Or I want to serve more in 2025. What spiritual practice could commit you to getting closer in alignment with God's will for you in 2025? How will you allow God to shape your story in the year ahead as we co-author our lives, our stories with God? And maybe consider picking a word or a theme for 2025 that encaptures your intention. So this is a lot to think about, a lot to chew on, but it's a guide designed to help us to be intentional as we begin this new year together. So I invite you to begin reflecting on that this morning and to take it home with you to continue to reflect, to see what God wants to do in and through you in this new year.